Friends, we are at week 7. We're in the final stretch of piecing our blocks together. This week we are focusing on the small orange peels and putting blocks together that have 4 units that make up a block. Okay, so I'll be covering both of those things, and then once those are done, all our individual blocks are finished for the bloom. And next week we'll focus on putting those together. Very exciting. I'm here to cheer you on. Let's get started. No more delays. Let's get down to business. All right, today we're doing our teeny tiny little orange peels. These are the ones that go in the units, in the blocks that have 4 units. And if you're working on the medium size quilt, the finished size of these will be 3.5 inches before you put them into the full block, right? And the size for the large will be 4.5 inches. Okay, once we get them together. So first of all, I'm doing just what I did with the large ones. Nothing different, nothing new. Thank goodness, right? And we can pin baste or glue baste these. So pin basting, again, you want to put it right up against the edge. So orange to green, the opposite side, right there. Okay, and then you would be adding your pins in between. Okay, that's if you're pinning, and you're going to add a few pins here and here. If you're glue basting, boom, we've got another one here. Let's add our glue. And then again, we're going to stitch 1/4 inch. And again, I would recommend pinning or glue basting a whole stack of these, and then take them to your machine, sew them up, come back, trim them, iron them. You know, do it in steps. That way, it's also handy because if you're doing one step, you can do one step in one day, come back, do the next step the next day, and it keeps everything organized. Okay, so now this is glue basted. It's ready to go and be sewn up. All right, so again, I've got this one all sewn, and I'm going to give it a nice little finger press first before I iron it. And I'm just going to press straight down, get right into that nice seam allowance right there. Okay, that looks good. I don't have any overage to trim off, so I don't need to worry about that. Instead, I can turn it over. There's my registration mark. And I can add the second piece right here. I'll repeat the process, and then I'll have a finished teeny tiny orange peel. Say your piece is coming up a little bit short. You can undo it and stretch it a little more, or you can leave it as long as it's within the seam allowance. So here, let me show you this. See this? This should be touching the orange, and it's not quite making it. Now, I could sew it in place. It'll still catch within my seam allowance with the 1/4 inch, but it's a little too close for comfort. So what I would probably do is undo this. And then I'm going to use that because this is cut on a curve and there's a little bit of stretch to it. I am going to just pull this a little bit, gently guiding it from here to here. If I've used my pins, I'd already have this end pinned into place. So there you can see I've made it work. I made it work. On this one, same thing, it's coming up a little bit short. If I was using pins, I could avoid that problem by just pinning this here, right up against where it needs to go. And then I could go back and make these pieces fit. Okay, so I do want to try my best to make this go all the way to the edge. If it's coming up a little short, it's okay as long as it's fitting within that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, we've got the second half on. I'm just going to open this up. Again, give it a nice finger press. There we go. Okay. Nice, and you should have a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here because those will end up as seam allowance, and then you'll just have the orange peel that's left. You may end up with a little line of fabric showing when you get all of these together. That looks good to me. Let's measure. Mine should be 4.5 inches. Yes, it's a little short right here on this corner by like 1/8 of an inch. If I really want to, I can take this iron and kind of stretch it over here a little bit. There. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so 4.5 inches if you're making the large, 3.5 inches if you're making the small. And then next up, finally, I'm going to show you how to put the units together to make your 4-unit blocks. And then that's it, folks. Then we get into assembly. So exciting. All right, thanks for sticking around. Good luck with your orange peels. So this week, in addition to sewing our little orange peels, we're also taking our little orange peels and our leftover HSTs and we're putting them together into our 4-unit blocks. Okay, so the first step to do this is to lay it out according to your quadrant layout. So I'm making this one here. I've double checked that everything is oriented the way it needs to be. And now I'm going to put these into pairs, and then I'll put those 2 halves together. This is the same process that we went through when we made the quarter curve circle blocks. We put all 4 of those curves together, and you're just doing them in pairs. So here's the challenge. There's quite a bit of bulk here already because of these seams. So if I put this one on top, the benefit of putting this one on top is that then I can see where I'm sewing, and I can not go over this stitch line, so I'm not losing any detail on my orange peel, right? The downside is this is quite a bit of fabric, and leading with that into your machine, some machines do not like that, and it'll be really hard. You'll have to sort of jam it against the needle for it to catch and keep sewing. So the other option would be to pair these up, but then flip it over and start sewing from this side where you only have 2 layers. The downside is then you can't see where your needle is hitting on the orange peel. But if you've cut your orange peels correctly, you should be fine. You may end up with a little bit of extra fabric in your seam. I'll show you what that looks like. That's totally normal and totally cool, okay? So I am going to sew these like this with just the 2 layers. Okay, so I've got these 2 halves ready. I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch. I can't see exactly where I'm hitting on these orange peels, but we'll open these up and have a look before we move to the next step, okay? I'm not going to iron anything just yet. I'm just going to sew them up. All right, these have been sewn, and I know it's hard to see in this light. I sewed on this side, so I couldn't see exactly where it was landing on my orange peel. But when I open this up, you'll see there's a little bit of extra orange here, and that's totally normal for these blocks. It's totally fine. So this is the top one, and because this is already so bulky here, I'll be ironing towards the half square triangle. So I'm ironing the seam to that side for that one. And then this one, if you don't have that little sliver and you've gone all the way to the very edge, that's great. But if you do have a sliver, that's cool too, okay? Okay, so I've pressed this one to this half square triangle, so they're pressed in opposite sides. And once again, I will be nesting these seams. So bumping this one up against this one and pinning. I highly recommend pinning along the way here, okay? And making this as even as possible. You can see that some of these blocks, like they're not all exact. So I'm just evening it out like this. So we'll stitch again 1/4 of an inch and then see how that looks, open it up and see what the result is. My machine is not a fan of the amount of bulk here. So when I go like this, it's just my machine does not want to catch that edge. So here is a trick that you can use. start from the middle instead. Okay, so I'm going to drop my foot down and I'm going to stitch down to here. This way my machine can handle the fabric. All right, take this and then, whoops. And then I'm gonna have to take this and flip it over, right? Because I need to keep it in this direction. That's fine. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do. And these blocks do have some bulky bits. So now I'm starting from where I left off, but a few stitches behind. So I've got some stitches here. I'm just gonna start about 1/2 inch back from where I stitched before. I don't need to back stitch. Drop my needle right back into where that stitching is. And move to the other edge. You can see I tried to put it in my machine and it just caught it and smushed it all together. So I had to clean it up a little bit and there. Now it's being able to go over that chunky bit. And now I'll just iron it up and we'll see how it looks. Here's the block all sewn together, and let's just zoom in so you can see how I've ironed it. So I ironed it up, but there's a thick seam here and thick seam here. So when I ironed it, I want the orange peel to go towards the half square triangle. So this one, I kept the seam pointing down and then come along here and I've just flipped it up here. So you can see on the back, it's flipped over. You could do this at any point really, right all the way to here if you want to. But in any case, that helps reduce the bulk by pointing it away. It's still gonna be a chunky seam. It will still be a little challenging when you attach it to the next block, but so far so good. Everything is lined up here, and I don't worry too much about bulk inseams because I tend to, when I'm quilting this up, when it's all, the whole top is all done, I try to avoid having any quilting hitting seams. So I generally, if I'm quilting, I am working outside of the ditch. I'm not going right in here, and I just avoid it as much as I can. Yeah, so that's it. This is the 4-unit block. There are a few different ones in our layouts. Something else I should mention, I want to show you a quarter curve block being put together. So this is the one we worked on when we were doing quarter curves. It looks like the full circle. I call them the bloobs, the blueberries or the purple berries. And you can see these, as much as I tried to square these up, some of them weren't perfect. Some of them weren't exactly 4.5 inches the way they should have been. And so what I do is I line up the two halves as best I can along here, right? So at least it's squared off. And then when I put this half on top of this half, you can see I've had to fudge this a little bit. So I've had to take, this block was tinier than the other 3 blocks, and so that just means that I've had to pull it down. This is still nice and centered. I've still got enough fabric to catch it within the 1/4 inch. All right, so this is just an example of when you have blocks that aren't perfect or that are a little bit smaller than all the other units and you need to get them in, at least try to line them up as best you can along the outside and fudge it on the inside, on the inner seams, okay? As I've said recently to a guild, we keep our secrets in the seams as quilters, okay? So it'll be just fine, okay? Yeah, so that's how I handle these. And then you do the same sort of thing as you're putting blocks together. So when we get to the point next week where we start attaching everything together, you may find that some of your blocks aren't all exactly the same sizes. And this is, again, where you might have to sort of fudge it a little bit along the edge to make them all fit together. You can see on this side, this purple one is a bit smaller than the other one, but there's enough fabric all the way around that it's within 1/4 of an inch, meaning I can still catch it in the seams and make everything fit together. And for now, get your 4-unit blocks together and get those all ready to go. We are in the home stretch. Keep going.